I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the most recent unity agreement between Fatah and Hamas. The agreement was brokered by Egypt. Now, you may remember this is not the first time Hamas and Fatah have been in a unity government. In February of 2007, Saudi Arabia brought Fatah and Hamas together in a unity government, but there were fierce battles between the two groups over control of the Gaza Strip, causing Mahmoud Abbas to declare a state of emergency and to dismiss the unity government. Then again, in June of 2014, a unity government was formed between Hamas and Fatah. It lasted 13 months. You may also remember, 1 month after the unity government was formed, Hamas kidnapped and murdered 3 Israeli teenagers, prompting Israel to respond with Operation Protective Edge, also known as the 2014 Gaza War, which we reported on daily here on JBS. Fatah and Hamas could never agree on tactics. Each side went after each other's opposing leaders. And in July of 2015, Mahmoud Abbas said it was hopeless for him to govern in Gaza, and again the unity government promptly dissolved. Of course, each time there is a unity government, peace advocates hope it's a breakthrough and that peace negotiations can begin in earnest. And at the same time, there are always critics of any unity government, pointing out that Hamas still has an irredentist policy rejecting the legitimacy of the State of Israel, and that Hamas remains sworn to Israel's destruction. Which is why the Israeli government has traditionally taken the position that as long as Hamas is part of a Palestinian unity government, no peace negotiations are possible unless and until Hamas formally and honestly changes its position on Israel's right to exist. Already the Israeli government this time has said it will not enter peace talks with the new unity government unless Hamas recognizes Israel's right to exist, ceases all terror activities, disarms, severs all ties with Iran, and returns the bodies of 2 fallen IDF soldiers, our own Shaul and Hadar Golden, both of whom were killed in Operation Protective Edge in 2014. Hamas is also holding 3 civilians in Gaza, whom Israel says must be returned. How should we now view this iteration of a Hamas-Fatah unity government? Does it signal any substantive change in the Palestinian world? And what are its implications for peace between Israel and the Palestinians? For some analysis, I'm so pleased to be joined once again on JBS phones from Israel, an expert on the Palestinian Authority's attitude and behavior toward the State of Israel and toward Jews in general, Itamar Marcus, the founding director of Palestinian Media Watch, a wonderful organization which I hope you all know about, and I hope you visit their website constantly to upgrade your own knowledge about the Middle East. And Itamar, thank you so much for joining us once again.
It's always great to be with you, Mark.
First of all, Shana Tova, I hope you had a wonderful Chagim, and that this new year is both healthy for you and those you love, and you continue to do your wonderful work.
Thank you very much, and to all your listeners as well.
Thank you. So, Itamar, before we discuss the current unity government, I want you to first update us on what you see the Palestinian Authority is doing now vis-a-vis incitement and terrorism, or cracking down on Palestinian terrorism against Israelis and against Jews in general.
The Palestinian Authority has a policy of continuously promoting hatred against Israel, And then selectively, when they need violence, they will then incite to terror and incite to violence. And we see this for many, many years. We saw that in November of 2014, when Abbas, for internal reasons, primarily he was very low in the polls, very, very low in the polls. He initiated terror at that point, and then 14 Israelis were killed in the Jerusalem area. The next year, he did the same thing. He initiated terror. But right now, he's not interested in terror at this very moment. And therefore, what we're seeing is a lot of hatred throughout the Palestinian Authority media, from the Palestinian Authority leaders. They're not inciting to violence right now. They're talking now about what they call a peaceful, popular resistance, a nonviolent resistance. But like I said, this will last only as long as politically that's important for the Palestinian Authority. And as soon as Mahmoud Abbas feels that violence would be in his interest, then he turns on the switch, incites to the violence, and then we will have another round of violence.
Okay, a couple of immediate questions. First of all, you talk about Fatah wanting to institute peaceful resistance against Israel. Against what? What is the resistance against? Is it simply against Israel's, quote, occupation on the West Bank, or is it in some way against Israel as an entity as a whole?
That's the key question, and it's not really a question. The answer is very straightforward. But I'll just tell you, the word resistance is a very smart Palestinian word, and I was using it. I was not saying it's resistance. That's their euphemism for terror. It's euphemism for violence. Israel, they use that word because they know that that was the word that was used during World War II and at other times to refer to freedom fighters who were fighting against the Nazis. So they have adopted that word as their own word, and they will refer to resistance, killing civilians in their home, killing men, women, and children. They will always call this resistance. In fact, I will even go beyond that. Last year, after 15 or 20 Israelis in 2015 had already been killed, so it was the beginning of 2016, Mahmoud Abbas gets on television and he says, what's happening now is what we called for. This is peaceful, popular resistance. So stabbing Israelis and running them down in cars and occasionally shooting them is peaceful, popular resistance. And if the Palestinian security forces get involved, then they change the name and they call it Intifada. Intifada is another interesting euphemism. Intifada means shaking off. Both of those terms, resistance and shaking off, are terms that completely hide the significance of what's going on because both of those are defensive terms. If you're resisting, it's defensive. If you're shaking off, it's defensive. And so that the actual, the very, very smart political terms that the Palestinian Authority has chosen in order to hide terror behind presumably defensive actions. Now, your question, what's the Palestinian Authority's endgame? Well, the endgame that they tell their people regularly and that they teach their children is the end game is Palestine from the river to the sea.
Yes.
We have heard it so many times on children's programs. And I'll just tell you something else. Right now we're studying all the new books that came out for 2017, the new school books. Palestinian Authority published in 2017. It's about 80 different books. We've gone through almost all of them.
Yes.
And I can tell you that the school books are worse than ever before.
In what way?
There is absolutely no... In what way? First of all, there is absolutely total rejection of Israel's right to exist. They talk about barbaric gangs coming from foreign countries and taking land that they had no connection to. There's absolutely no right. But it's beyond the past. They also look to the future, or I would say the present. In the present, they define the boundaries of Palestine as every bit of Israel. So they talk about the size of Palestine. They measure Palestine. They have children draw maps of Palestine. And it's, by the way, it's not geographic area. Draw the map of your state, Palestine, and then you see the map of all of Israel, including the Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip, and then you've got the outlines of the Palestinian flag, and then the child is asked to put the right colors into his state of Palestine. And that, of course, is a symbol of of political sovereignty when they have the colors of the flag. And there are many flags, by the way, in the school books with those same things. So they present a world in which there is no Israel to their people. They present a world in which, and by the way, in the 80 books, we have not yet seen the name Israel once. They refer to Israel in any borders as the occupation.
Okay, I want you to address something for me. Again, at the moment, we're not in dialogue with, we're not presenting a dialogue between people with differing views. I wanted to speak to you because I believe you have an insight that is very important for the American Jew and the American in general who watches JBS to understand. But were there someone who was on the other side, they would say to you, aren't there Jewish textbooks, especially textbooks created by those on the right, which show all of Israel to include the West Bank? And that although it's true that everything you've described is true, the comment always made is, it's as if only Palestinians have a holistic approach to the end of Palestine, but that in the Jewish community, there are also those on the right who would produce the same kind of map, and they'd have Israel as the entirety of the land. And I would ask you to respond to that. And is there a difference between the Palestinian perspective that you've described, which is very upsetting, but is it any different than the perspective we also see from the Jewish right?
So the official maps that are used in the Israeli school books today are maps that designate the reality of the situation today. They put Israel in all of the state of Israel's territory, and then they have the West Bank divided into areas A, which is under Palestinian jurisdiction, area B, which is joint Israeli military supervision and Palestinian civilian rule, and then you have the area C, which Israel rules completely. And those are the maps that appear in the books. That's the first thing.
Okay, but I understand that those are the maps that are produced by the Israeli mainstream system. What people say to me all the time is, yes, but there are multiple educational systems in Israel, and there is an educational system for the religious right, and in their schools, the map you described is not the map that they use. Now, what's the truth here, Itamar?
Let me tell you, the Israeli right, and especially the Israelis who are living in Judea and Samaria, have been so actively trying to promote peaceful coexistence with their Palestinian neighbors. There are so many programs of coexistence going on. And I don't really mean, meeting once every 3 weeks. I'm talking about economic enterprises where Palestinians and Israelis are sitting side by side. And these are happening in Judea and Samaria. They're happening quietly because the communities want them, the Palestinians want them, the Arabs want them, the Israelis want them. The leadership, the Palestinian leadership, which is interested in hatred and demonization of Israelis, doesn't want this to happen, so that people have to keep this quiet. But this is happening all over the place. Israelis who live throughout Judea and Samaria don't want to expel the Palestinians who live there. They see them as their neighbors. They recognize that they have rights to live where they're living. So this trying to demonize the Israeli right and the Israelis who are living in Judea and Samaria is a demonization. Yes, there are fringe. But America also has its Nazis who marched, not so long ago, who created a storm. So every country has their fringe. When I talk about the Palestinian school books, this is the mainstream. This is what's produced by the Palestinian Authority government. Every single school book is signed on the front page. All these new school books are signed by the Minister of Education. The Minister of Education. So this is the message that Palestinian Authority children are getting from their leadership. Israel has no right to exist. There are barbarian gangs who came and stole your land with no rights, and in the future there will be no no state of Israel. Everything will be Palestine, and that is presented as justice.
I understand. You know, the implication is that Fatah has recognized Israel's right to exist. It's only Hamas that has not. You're telling us something a little bit different. Do I have it right?
It's completely different. There have been, I'll give you a fascinating article that once appeared in the official Palestinian newspaper. And what the writer said, and he was also a member of the Palestinian, he had a position in the Palestinian Authority. I can't remember his name, but what he said was, there is no Palestinian, not Hamas or Fatah, who recognizes Israel's right to exist. But anyone who is just realistic looks and they see that there is a state called Israel right now. So what he was saying is, I recognize that Israel exists, but I'm telling you it has no right to exist. And I want to tell you something else very fascinating. We were publicizing for the longest time that this is the Palestinian Authority ideology, to get as much territory as they can, and from that territory to keep fighting Israel till Israel won't exist. One of the people who said this explicitly on television was a person named Abbas Zaki, who's a member of the Fatah Central Committee, which is the equivalent of a Fatah government. He's a senior person. He also represents Mahmoud Abbas sometimes in his travels. And Abbas Zaki said on television that the goal now, the stated goal, is the June 1967 borders. And he continued, because everyone knows Israel can't survive those borders. The real goal is all of Palestine, the greater Palestine, but everyone knows Israel can't survive. And then he says, you can say this to yourself, but you can't say this to the world. So, of course, we had tape recorded him saying this, and we've publicized it. Now, I'll tell you something the most interesting. After we were publicizing this, we were contacted by the Washington Institute for Near East Studies, and they asked us about this, and they decided to do a poll of Palestinians, and they asked them about this stages plan. And what they asked them was, should there be peace and all of Palestinian requests would be fulfilled, should Palestinians continue the battle to liberate what they called all of historic Palestine? So close to 70% said yes. And then they were asked one more question. What's the government's plan? And the answer was even higher. Even more of them felt that the government's plan was the same thing. Get as much land as you can and then continue to get all of Israel. Why? Because they've heard it from their leaders so many times. They understand that's what the goal is. That's what the plan is.
Okay. We're going to come back to a question that your comments lead me to. But I first want to understand, from your perspective, is there anything different about this Fatah-Hamas unity government agreement from any of the unity agreements which preceded it? Anything new here?
Yes. What's new here is that both sides are desperate. And sometimes desperation can lead to compromises that we wouldn't have had before. Particularly, let's start with Hamas. Hamas is desperate because, as I'm sure your viewers know, the Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas has cut off a lot of services. They're only getting limited amounts of electricity because the government, the Palestinian Authority government, doesn't want to pay for it. Egypt, which had been the lifeline to Gaza, Egypt has closed off that border for many, many months because what they had seen was that Hamas, which is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, was actually helping some of those terrorists who were in Sinai who were killing Egyptian soldiers. So Hamas found themselves cut off from the south with no way out. Israel was their only outlet. Israel's limiting, although Israel gives them all of their basic needs. Israel isn't allowing them the supplies they want to build up tunnels and all their terror things. A lot of countries had cut off financial aid to them because they've got their own problems. So Hamas was desperate. So that's the only reason Hamas is even talking about this, was really one of desperation. The people are fed up with a Hamas leadership that can't rule, that can't supply basic services. Now, why is Mahmoud Abbas desperate? Mahmoud Abbas doesn't want to go down in history as a total failure. He's in his 80s. He certainly doesn't have many years to rule. He might have a few more years to rule. He doesn't want the one, in Palestinian history to go down as the one who was the leader when there was a civil war, when the Palestinians were split into two. He wants to be in control of Gaza again. So, therefore, he's desperate at this point in his life to do anything to get Hamas back on board, and Hamas is desperate because they're collapsing. So, those two situations of desperation sometimes create strange bedfellows.
Okay. Does this mean, from your perspective, Hamas is prepared to accept Israel's legitimacy in portions of Palestine? Are you suggesting that the desperation would push Hamas that far?
No, but I'm not going that far. And the difference on that issue is really one of a public face. Mahmoud Abbas, likewise, doesn't recognize Israel's long-term right to exist in any part of what he calls Palestine.
Say that again.
Hamas,
say that again, because that was where I wanted to sort of develop the thought as well. You're telling us that even though the popular presentation is Hamas is still anti the existence of Israel, will not accept the legitimacy of a Jewish state anywhere in Palestine, Abbas, the PA, Fatah have moved, and they are willing to live side by side with a Jewish state. Now, when you and I talk, you explain to me
that's not what
case.
I said. Fatah is not willing.
Not will. That's right. You're telling us it's not willing. And my question for you is, Itamar, there are many very bright people in the United States foreign government, in our government, doing foreign policy, doing Middle East policy. There are very bright people in every Western country of the world. What? They don't see this? How do you explain the fact that on American television, in American newspapers, in the administrations, one after the other, there is almost a charade that Fatah and the PA and Abbas, they're the good guys within the Jewish community here in America. There are well-meaning Jews who are idealistic about the chances for peace and the opportunities for peace and the desire for peace, which all of us have. And they say all the time, Fatah wants peace. How can it be that you're telling us it's not true and that all of these people don't understand what you're saying?
All of these leaders are listening very carefully to what Fatah and what Mahmoud Abbas is telling them in English. And his basic message is, all we want is peace. And yes, of course, there are things that are said that don't seem to make sense. And of course, we have extremists on our side. But that will all end the day we end the occupation, because as soon as we get our West Bank and get Jerusalem as our capital, that's all we care about. And then we'll, of course, make peace. And you can imagine what it's like to live under a racist, colonial occupation, etc. And they go on and on and on and on and on about this. And the world is being duped by that, because that's the message they're listening to. They're not listening to what they're telling their people in Arabic, and they're not listening to the way the people are responding in polls, to the way they understand it, as I just described it to you. So, and you say intelligent people. Let me just point out that the most intelligent people in Europe were talking to Hitler, and Chamberlain had all of his staff there, and they gave in to them. And the United States was busy negotiating with and talking to Japan when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And even more, I'll go even farther, Israel had all its top people aware of the negotiations with Yasser Arafat. And everybody trusted him, and I don't think there's anybody who believes now that Yasser Arafat was sincere about peace when he signed the Oslo Accords, and yet you had Yitzhak Rabin and you had all the Israeli leadership going along. And let's not forget that we had the top Israeli leadership missing the Yom Kippur War. So just because there are leaders, and we assume they know better, the leaders constantly make mistakes. Leaders are deceived all the time. And especially when they so much want to hear something else.
Yes.
If the United States is told that Abbas is, when it comes, his long-term goal is also to destroy Israel, and all his people say it, and that's what he's teaching his children. Well, then there is no peace process right now until those messages change. And people don't want to give up on the hope of a peace process. Right. So they pretend that what Abbas is telling them is actually accurate. But I think it's a function here of hoping. You hope so much that, look, Obama hoped that North Korea wasn't going to build an atomic bomb. He hoped it so much that he believed him. And he had all the wisest men in America in his administration, and look, and he was duped as well. So Tzipi Livni thought that when she signed a deal with Hezbollah, and the international community brokered it, that Hezbollah wouldn't bring any missiles into Lebanon. And now there are 200,000 terrible missiles in Lebanon, just waiting for the instructions to start firing in Israel. So just because leaders say something, it doesn't mean it's correct, and you have to look at the objective evidence. And all the objective evidence that we see is that the Palestinian Authority, in its long-term goals, is absolutely no different than the Hamas, and they say it openly.
Okay. It is so important that you have a platform here in America to say what you're saying, Itamar. I have one very quick question. We only have a minute or so left. Are you familiar with the Israeli television series Fatah?
No, I'm not, unfortunately. I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it, no.
Okay. It's a television series which now is available on Netflix. It is from an Israeli perspective. It's produced by Israelis, but it tries to show the humanity of both the Palestinian community and the Israeli community, and the horrible human tragedy that this conflict has basically been all about. It's hard for me to ask you to comment on it since you haven't seen it, but in terms of that theme, is there any comment you would make?
Absolutely. We're about to produce a whole series of videos and messaging talking about the Palestinians themselves being the primary or the first victims of their leadership. Mm-hmm. Palestinian children are victims because their leaders are poisoning their minds. They're not giving them any free choice. I talk about, for example, Ahmad Ben Nasser, who was the youngest terrorist in the last terror, with a 13-year-old terrorist who stabbed an Israeli 13-year-old boy in the neck and almost killed him. I don't blame Ahmad Ben Nasser, because when you see what he was brought up on, from grade one, from television programs he was watching, even cartoons that we've seen filled with hatred, I don't blame him for going out and stabbing an Israeli boy, because that's all he's learned. The Palestinian population, the Palestinian people are being victimized, they're being poisoned by their leadership. If a different leadership was there that would give them an opportunity to live with Israelis in peace, I am sure it would happen. Just remember that from 1967 to 1993, before the people started to be poisoned by the Palestinian Authority and Yasser Arafat, Palestinians and Israelis had no security fence. Palestinians, by the time the Oslo Accords were signed, there were close to 250,000 or more than 250,000 Palestinians working in Israel. Many of them were sleeping in Israel. Many of them spoke Hebrew. The economies were working together, and there was minuscule terror.
Yes.
People wanted to get along with, and more than that, a poll found that Palestinians felt Israel was the best in the world at the time in democracy and human rights. A Palestinian poll. Israel was the best by far in the world in democracy and human rights. So the Palestinian people are not the problem here. It's the Palestinian leadership, and we desperately need a change in the Palestinian leadership and give the people an opportunity to choose someone who really wants peace. And I'm hoping, and I think, at some point the people will actually choose peace.
That is so beautifully said. You know, Itamar, you should be on JBS on a regular basis. I'm going to check with you to see if we can do a regular segment with you. It is so important to have the perspective of Palestinian Media Watch and your own personal perspective. I am so grateful for the time. Again, I wish you Shana Tova Mituka. You should have a sweet, healthy, happy new year. You and I will speak often. Continue the wonderful work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Be well. Itamar Marcus, the founding director of Palestinian Media Watch. And if you're not a regular visitor to the PMW website, please be sure to check it out, palwatch.org. You'll get the latest information on the words and deeds of the Palestinian community. My thanks to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, JBS's associate director, Dara Golub, editors, John McDevitt and Cordelia Siporin, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.